So we're on. So hi everybody and good evening. Welcome to this week's episode of my series When I Feel. Very happy to welcome everybody back, and I'm very happy to welcome my guest for this week, Stephen Walter, my dear friend and colleague of many years, who is struggling with his phone right now, but is in a improvised, let's say, TV studios of his garden right now, and while on tour. Stephen, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Yoel. I'm very excited to talk to you. And such are the circumstances of Corona times. And I hope we will not mention the C word too much in this conversation.
Yeah, no, definitely. The C word is out, and I hope that your phone will last the experiment. So Stephen and I are actually going to talk today about a piece that means a lot to both of us, and actually that connects us as well, because I mean we've known each other now for longer than 10 years. I mean, if you could talk about yourself and say what you do, but we've known each other actually for a very long time, and we've made a lot of music together, and we've played this piece together. I conducted it, Stephen played cello in your festival, what, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that?
Must have been like 10 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a piece that not only means a lot to both of us, but connects us also, which I think made a lot of sense to ask you to come join me today. So let's basically start. Tell me, when is the first time you sort of came in contact with this music at all?
It must have been about 15 years ago, so not that long ago, actually. It was rather late in my development as a musician. I studied the cello, and I think early on in my studies, I first played it as a student project. And I was just sucked in by the deep melancholy we're there of the piece. It's a extraordinary. It has extraordinary depth to that specific feeling, and it's very hard to express, but easy to feel in the music, I think. And yeah, I've been taken by it very early, and I programmed it several times since.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's always hard to talk about any kind of feeling that you feel when you play or listen to something, because you never do the feeling justice, because the feeling is also, usually it's never just one or another, it's always ambivalent, and it's always so many different feelings. And we also, each one of us, we understand something different when we mention a certain feeling or another. I find it interesting that a lot of people connect this piece to something very dark, in a sense, as a very sort of as a very, I wouldn't say negative, but in a way like a piece of mourning or a piece of grief and so on. How do you see it the same way? When you say deep can go in so many ways. Where does it go for you?
Well, this is kind of a general thing that I connect to melancholy, or this sentiment that we're trying to describe here. And the music, I think, hits it spot on. It's for me much more a feeling of homecoming. Actually, it's not so much a painful feeling. It's more a feeling I feel. I don't know. It feels very natural to me to be in the state of kind of longing, not in the romantic sense, but in the sense of kind of broadening one's in a way one's feeling. Like it's like for me, a happy sensation is a kind of a claustrophobic one, and the melancholic feeling is a broad, spacious feeling for me. And this kind of spaciousness that I sense in melancholic music, and in this piece in particular, it's just a kind of a space that allows for many kind of feelings in different directions within that space. So it's for me, it's not a negative thing at all. It's more of a more a state of mind, a state of feeling that is more. It feels more like a space than a specific.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask. It's basically more a spiritual space than it is an actual feeling that you experience directly.
Right, and it's always connected to kind of an unresolved, something unresolved. I think that's kind of something that designates that feeling. It's a feeling of not getting anywhere, yet always in movement. And this kind of sense of movement, and also is a little bit esoteric, but like a spiritual dynamism is kind of something that is inherent, I think, to this kind of melancholic music. And that piece in particular. You know, it just never gets anywhere. It's always a
I think it's interesting that in a way that they call it metamorphosis in a sense, or metamorphosen, because it gives you the idea of variation, but at the same time that nothing gets variated. We get the same 5 motifs in this piece, and they kind of go, as you said, they go nowhere, but they always repeat in a way. They never repeat in the same way twice. But they don't do a development in the sense that they start somewhere and go somewhere else. So it's like you almost think by the time it was over, it never started to start with.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very much a sense of just constant development, and I think that's something that is very close to how I feel as a human being. Like, I'm not the same person now than 10 days ago, right? We're always in some kind of a different morphing state. And that's something that that in this music, that's the kind of romantic music in the best sense, I think, because it's this constant flux of states, and never really, easy landing. It's always moving.
But for me, I don't think music actually ever really starts. I think music is a constant state that is always there, but when we play, the moment the piece starts, in a way we make something audible that is always there. I don't think it's like it's in like an endless timeline that we create a moment where we change it from, let's say, music that I hear in my head, music that it goes on in your body, music that the listener is listening on the way to the concert hall, music that is just in our imagination, and it's just a moment where it becomes concrete. But then there's a moment where it stops, but it's never sort of a start-stop thing. It's always cyclical in a way.
Right, and what I love about this piece is, it's just the sheer virtuosity also of the writing. It's it's 23 solo voices, right? And they're all independently led. So you can take any single voice, and it's quite interesting material in a way. At least I've played several of different, like there's 7 or how many? 5. Yeah, 5 solo cello parts, and I played almost all of them, and they're all great parts. For themselves, and that's a really cool thing, how these 23 parts really morph into this big sound body. And I think that's also just the virtuosity of the writing, but also how kind of philosophically how every part is its own, really, in this piece.
Yeah, that's what I want to say. It's on a philosophical level, you could say that in a way that every part is its own, but also that the whole is more than just the sum of its parts, because in a way it's much more than just adding 23 instruments together. And so, and it's interesting because we always say that, of course, even in a section, let's say, just to explain to everybody that the piece is written for 23 separate voices. So in a normal setting, you'd have 6 violins or 10 violins or 12 violins, and they would all be playing the same music as a group. And here, each one of them plays a completely different voice, and there's total polyphony sometimes. And you have like I think there are points where you have 7, 8, or something, even 10 different voices at the same time, which is huge in a way. And it shows that the single voices aren't just one element that you can do without, because if it doesn't matter which part you take out, the whole sort of card house falls. And I think that's also interesting, that there's nothing superfluous about it. It's a construction that only works in that way. And you say it morphs, that's totally right, but on both a spiritual level, but also like on a level of tension and dramaturgical development, it doesn't matter which voice, if it's let's say the very exposed first violin voice, or if it's the third double bass, if you take one out, the construction collapses.
Right. How is I just wonder, how is this piece to conduct? Is it very is it especially hard, or is it something that is kind of flows from itself? How do you experience it as a conductor?
It's probably in one way the hardest piece I've ever conducted. Another way, it's extremely easy. The hard thing about it is that it's all about listening. And I think that it's in a way, I always say to all my conductor friends, you should conduct Metamorphosen once every 3 months, because it's like a hygienic training to stop being obsessed with output and start being more aware of input, because all you need to do in this piece is listen. And I think listening is happening way too rarely in general, among conductors, among players, among listeners in general. And it's because you have, and the beautiful thing, the thing I love about it most is that, when you have 23 people playing single parts, the level of responsibility of every player is huge, because everybody feels involved, because they're doing something that exposes them very much. So it's, for a conductor, it's great, because I'm dealing with with 23, let's say, like explosions of energy and of self involvement and in responsibility. And so I don't need to give as much, but I need to constantly listen and make sure that this like little equalizer of who is important at what time is constantly fine-tuned. That's super hard, but for me, I think one of the most gratifying pieces to work on.
As a performer, I've always felt it's also extremely gratifying and satisfying to perform, because it's so chamber musical kind of by nature. You know, you have to you have your own solo part which you have total responsibility for, so you really have to be a chamber musician, and you're always playing with different people. Like one time it's the 7th violin, and then it's the second viola, and you have to have the sense of absolute chamber musical responsibility, and really it's not an orchestra piece in this sense. It feels very much like a solo chamber music or soloist ensemble piece kind of, and of course in the best sense orchestra playing will always be like that, but that's
well, that's what I would say. Actually, orchestra playing at its best should be chamber music for just more people.
Right.
You know, and actually, it's a friend of mine said once after playing that, after this piece, you suddenly get to know all your colleagues that you didn't even know existed before. Exactly. Because suddenly you have to play with like the 4th stand, 2nd violin that you never even knew their name. And it's in a sense, but this is something that's why I always say, if you play that, it's incredible how in concerts where you play that piece, or in projects where you play that piece, you suddenly play every other piece in the program so much better, because your ears are tuned in a totally different way to take on, let's say, vibrations and energy from people that you otherwise were not on your radar. You were watching your principal, you're watching the conductor, maybe you're watching 1 or 2 other people, but here, like, suddenly, like, you have your antennas everywhere. And I think that's an extremely valuable experience. I mean, is that how you felt too?
No, absolutely. And it's also just such an emotional piece. Like, you really have very strong emotional cohesion in a group, because it's hard to pinpoint, but it's super strong stuff at any point. Like, there's no, I think this is very, in a way, very clear music. It feels very honest. I don't think we have to get into, you know, the whole situation. It was 1945 and all that, and Munich was all broken down, and it's of course a lot of controversy also over Richard Strauss and his role in the Nazi regime and stuff like that. But just as a piece of music, it's incredibly heartfelt, it feels.
For sure, but I think there's an interesting point to that. I don't think we should start talking about Strauss's role in Nazi Germany, because we will never end. You know, at the end of the day, we'll always be ambivalent, because, you know, there's always several sides to every one of those people. But interestingly, there's obviously this piece came from a place of profound distress. I mean, he felt some sort of deep pain in a way, whether it was a destruction of the Munich Opera House, as many people say, whether it was just the end of a world, the end of a civilization, the end of a cultural value that meant a lot to him, whatever. But there was deep distress, and this distress somehow transports itself to us, because we can still relate to it in a way, although we're obviously moved by other topics today. And I just wonder what it is about this piece that makes it so relatable in a sense, because there's nothing about it that is sort of effective. I mean, it's in the most ineffective music, yet it goes straight to the soul.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you, because you chose this as a representative of the melancholia emotion, how do you relate to that emotion, or that kind of mental space in general?
Yeah, so the thing is, for me, Melancholia is absolutely not a mental space, but on the other hand, I can completely relate to everything you said in the beginning, because for me, Melancholia is an extremely positive feeling. And I think that if I look at it as a spectrum of the good and the bad feelings, of course, it's not as simple as that, but there is all sorts of feelings that are related to sadness and depression and negativity and mourning and all that. They're all on the negative side. And then there is this one feeling that is exactly on the 0, which is where I am most in my own balance, which is Melancholia, because it's about, for me, the pleasure of enjoying the ability to experience sadness as a positive, energizing, inspiring energy or impulse, let's say. So it's never about a negativity that pulls you down. It's a state where, or it's a feeling where you're able to taste your own sadness and use it as something positive that pushes you forward.
Yeah.
And I never saw Melancholia. I mean, people use that often to describe, human beings or characteristic, whatever, and something negative is kind of like, oh, somebody's very melancholic, as if they're very depressive. For me, the melancholia has absolutely got nothing to do with depression. It's almost like this middle state that I personally, just as you said, find it's a very grateful state.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I have so many also very positive memories of melancholic states of being, or melancholic phases in my youth or childhood, for example. Just sitting around and kind of sensing stuff. I think that's in itself kind of a melancholic feeling, to actually be very open to sensoric experiences beyond beyond the rational self. And I think that's very much, for me, part of melancholia, is to just walk through a city or sit in a subway station and just kind of daydream to some extent. And that's a very positive and also very creative feeling for me.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's always with the feeling, it's about whether it's about closure or about opening in a way on an energetic level. And I think this is why I also picked it. It was the first feeling I thought of when I thought Strauss Metamorphosen. I'd really like to put this piece. It means a lot to me. It's so different from every other Strauss piece I know, because if I think of his earlier pieces, there's so much adrenaline and so much power and there's so much flair. And then there is this operas and there's so many sides to them. And this piece is really just melancholic in the sense that it's not just there was destruction and then we're mourning the past. It's never just backward looking. Even like Rosenkavaliers, same thing. It's mourning and at the same time using that as almost on a you could say like an alchemist, turning the mourning into an energy. And it kind of reminds me also of something that you said to me actually a few years ago. One of your pearl sentences that never leave me for many, many years. Okay. where you said to me that you feel that I derive inspiration from pain, or the pain turns to energy, and that what I create art from. And I always thought that when I play this piece, I feel that this man, in a way, felt pain that gave him immediately the energy to create. And
absolutely. It almost creates this exuberance out of pain. And it creates a sense of energy that comes from this very tragic moments. Suddenly a violin will break out and it's kind of this exuberant feeling. Sorry, I do have to plug in, but we keep going. This is fine.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So Stephen is giving us a tour
into my random cafe in Schwerin.
Okay.
So I'm juiced.
Are you plugged?
I'm plugged. Okay.
Okay, cool. Little change of scenery makes it all the more authentic.
Right, exactly.
So no, yeah. So the exuberance, I mean, it's clear. And that's the thing. For me, Melancholia always is very, very closely connected to incredible joy and incredible euphoria. Always, I think actually the closest feeling to Melancholia is euphoria in a sense. It's not a passive emotion. It's a very powerful emotion. And Stephen, you're muted. Are you on?
Yeah, I'm on.
Okay, cool.
I'm on. No, exactly. And for me, I mean, what I meant with the space metaphor is kind of, for me, just it makes the space that gives me really space to breathe in a way. The sense of let's say latent and powerful sadness, that can come out of this kind of state of mind, and then you can really just move within it. I feel for me, it gives me really a lot of mobility spiritually, kind of.
Do you know this state when you're having a bad day or a bad time, or you're just in a bad phase, and then you feel that exactly in that moment you are artistically most prolific?
Yeah, I mean, it's a cliche, of course, a little bit to some extent, but that is quite true. I mean, it's not the same as sadness in the,
That's exactly the point. So I'm absolutely I absolutely hate the idea of this suffering artist, that you kind of, sit in the attic and suffer pain, and therefore you become, only then you can be good. I think that's bullshit. I think you can be amazing when you're experience total happiness. But the thing is, there's a moment where you personally think that you're in a bad place, whereas actually your creative part of your brain is at its absolute highest moment.
Exactly. And this kind of tension or friction can be a very, very powerful propeller for creativity and for also inspiration. I feel very much that being this in the state of melancholy has been, it's kind of a state I'm really looking for actively, and that's and also one more thing I want to say about this in terms of music, because music, I think, is of all the arts the best space for melancholia. Would you agree, or do you think it translates as well in literature or in any other?
I think it has totally to do with this, with the way people relate to those arts, and I think we all have different sensors and different antennas and different buttons, and I think some people just are so much more responsive to visuals, so they reached exactly the same feelings that we have to music when they look at a painting. I think it's very much about the receptor and the source have a 50-50 role in the feeling that gets created. See what I mean? Stephen, I lost you briefly. Are you back there?
I lost you for a second.
Sorry? Yeah, I lost you too. What I was saying, I think that it's at least got to do 50-50 with the source and with the receptor of an experience. So I think that it's hard to say whether just music in itself creates that.
Do you think is it a lonely sensation, or is it something one can be or have in a group?
That's a very good question. I never thought about that. I always have it, even when I'm with a group, because my work is about usually being with a group. Still, it's something so intimate that I feel like nobody else is having the exact same experience. Although we are more united probably than in any other setting, it's still something I only experience alone.
Yeah.
How is it for you?
No, I think it's for me, it's very intimate. It's very personal. At the same time, one can have this collective feeling of collectively creating it in a way.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I feel like, especially with this piece, there is rarely a piece of music creates more of a collective feeling, yet at the same time, it's almost an agreement that nobody is having the same exact experience. Yeah. Nobody talks about what experience they're having because they know it'll be ruined the moment that it becomes externalized.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
It was interesting you said the word friction, because I think friction is such an important part of this piece, in the sense that, first of all, harmonically, Strauss was so reproached for being like so conservative and backward looking and so on. And while everybody was writing modern music, he was still writing Metamorphosen and the oboe concerto that sound like 50 years earlier. And to me, they don't. To me, there is tension in every single bar in this piece. For me, there's always tension between things, whether it's a note to another note that they don't quite. In a way that are in constant friction. Whether, are you with me?
I am with you, absolutely.
Okay, or whether it's like a sort of an instrument with another instrument, or it's an idea against an idea, there's always a certain form of friction. And I think the place where you feel that most strongly is that after 25 minutes of that intensity, when I think intensity is the main word to describe this piece, suddenly you have the Eroica quote at the end, and it feels so wrong. It doesn't feel like, oh, this catharsis of, this is the great old world. It just feels there's such friction between that and everything we've experienced.
Absolutely. And just the first couple bars, I mean, I analyzed it once. I don't remember exactly what's going on there, but it's pretty crazy, right? Just the harmonics and the harmonic progression there, and then this tritone up, which is, kind of this, it has everything's in there already in the first couple bars.
Sure, but at the same time, it's not Wagnerian in the sense that it doesn't want something from you. It doesn't manipulate you. It's just there. And that has so much to do with melancholy. It's not a manipulative feeling. It's a state.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think this is a special piece for I mean, his operas, and you did many of them, I believe. Mm-hmm. Does it stand out for Strauss's work?
I think completely, because I think in a way Strauss said everything he had to say after he finished Capriccio, as his last opera, and I think that he wrote this piece after he's achieved everything. He didn't want to achieve anything with it. I mean, he was a very practical man that always did things for a purpose, and I think he wrote that it probably is his most personal piece, because it came from a place of not wanting anything, but of being utmost vulnerability.
Yeah. Isn't it that he, I think after Capriccio, he actually kind of stopped writing music in a way. He just everything he did was he just said, Fingerübungen kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. He stopped conducting as well, and then he said, he just wrote. He actually called Metamorphosen and study. You said it's a study. Anything? I mean, are you just being understating, or is it actually? And I think in a way, it's it's not a coquetterie. It's really a true sort of lack of intent, in the sense of it's not supposed to be art with a capital A. It's just a need to express something in the only way he knew.
Yeah, and that must have come from a deep sense of melancholia, which is, of course, understandable feeling to have in April 45.
Of course. But I don't think he wanted to achieve anything with it. And that's also incredibly inert to Melancholia, that it doesn't want something. It's a state that is, it's not passive, but it's a state of acceptance in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it is in many ways meditative. And whenever coming into a, winding down kind of from a stressful period, because stressful periods are often, you push yourself with, different kinds of hormones or whatever. And whenever I come down, I tend to default into a state of melancholia, which is, again, a good state to be in.
So you could say it's almost like post-adrenaline in some way.
Yeah, in a way. It's kind of something I default to whenever I kind of get closer to myself, and that's
that's what I want to say. Actually, I feel myself most strongly in a melancholic state.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, which is why also, there's maybe one more thing one can talk about. Do you think this is a German phenomenon? Because I feel, German romanticism is kind of really goes deep into that feeling, which has historic reasons, right? Because Germany as a nation didn't really exist, and they had to sublimate different things in music and art and stuff, and this sense of longing. Do you think Melancholia is a in that way kind of a more German phenomenon than, let's say, French or whatever?
It's interesting that you said that. It almost feels telepathic, because the moment you start asking the question, I knew there's going to be the word German in there. Yeah. To me, it's actually his least German piece of all, because although there's so many theories, they say that it's some people say that it was about Goethe, and there's a Goethe structure to it. There's a poem that he wrote in the same notebook where the sketches of the early sketches of Metamorphosen, there's a Goethe poem in there. So there's a sort of a Goethean philosophy behind the whole approach, the whole structure, and so on. To me, that's actually the opposite, because German music is, for me, first and foremost about structure and about in a way, symmetry and form, in a sense. And I think this piece has the most incredible form because of how formless it is. I mean, of course, we know that to create chaos, you need to have more structures. So of course, there's huge structure to it, but it's basically a feeling where a piece where the process is the result. Yeah. And that I find absolutely un-German. I think Germans, if I may generalize, find it very hard to relate to things that are just kind of a Schwebezustand, as we say, or the kind of thing that is in a transition where there is not an A and a B. The transition is the goal. I mean, it sounds a bit new agey, but I think with this piece, it's never about going anywhere, and there's no climax to this piece. There are, of course, loud moments, but the piece is just basically like a little, let's say, window, but to a timeline that could go on forever, where the transition is the state.
And it could just repeat too. Like in the end, it could just it's like basically tuning into something, and then it kind of tunes out again.
Well, now that you say that, it's any way you could say it. It's like it's the predecessor of minimal music in some way.
Yeah. And about that. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's also the way it just works with this limited material, but it's not theme and variation in any way. It's just this really interesting morphing. Like it's like watching a river. It's just kind of, it's the same river, but it's different water.
Exactly. That's exactly the thing. There is actually no variation, but it's never the same water again. That's absolutely that.
Okay, dude, I'm being thrown out here, actually.
And we've talked for long enough. I hope that you have a nice day with in your interesting cafe there. Thanks so much for joining me, and hope to see you soon. Ciao,
Thank you. Bye-bye.